Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with Tom Billinge again for another episode of Martial Praxis. Thank you so much for doing this. Oops, just knocked down my book. Okay.
My absolute pleasure. Glad to be back.
So you just released a new book. I just got my copy in the mail yesterday. I've been alternating reading and skimming it, and already found quite a few things that got me pretty interesting in it. But one thing, just right off the bat, that I wanted to know from you, because the your first book was about the Indian system, and then you have this one with the Persian system next, and both of those are like in some ways kind of disconnected from modern Western culture, right?
Right.
But they offer a lot of unusual strength training methods and things that we don't see in the West. But then with this book, it's a little bit different because it's kind of like the foundation of what we do see in the West. So I'm curious, what was your inspiration? Like, why did you want to investigate this in particular?
Okay, it's a good question. So, on a very, very base level, I am half Greek myself. So that obviously is always impacted my life. I've always had an interest in kind of culturally Greek things. I'm not quite one of those Greeks that believes that everything is Greek, but there are out there. But I do know that, and I do understand that essentially Greece is sort of the root of a lot of what we consider to be the Western tradition of everything, in terms of philosophy and into religion and things like that. I mean, it kind of it comes, and architecture.
No, this stuff goes so deep under our culture, and it's something interesting. I was having an argument with somebody, not a friendly argument, about which empire was greater, the Egyptian Empire or the Persian Empire. I was arguing for the Egyptian. They were arguing for the Persian Empire. I don't know where you stand on that. I won't make you take a stance right now, but if you want to, you
can. Well, in terms of size, I guess probably the Persians
was bigger.
But in terms of antiquity,
Egyptian was longer.
Egyptians, so, I mean, I don't want to take a strong stance. I mean, I have a personal preference for the Persian because of my learning, but I do enjoy Egyptian things, and so I am going to certainly. I'd like to visit Egypt one day. So it's a country I've not been to. So, I mean, once I visit a country, I feel more of an affinity for it.
Gotcha.
And then it's like, I can't.
All right. It sounds like you're on the Persian side. So that's 2 for the Persian Empire and
unfortunately 1 for 2 against you. But yeah, I mean, so ultimately, I always had a vision in my head for WarYoga, and it was really to kind of explore the kind of where the Indo-European impact was and what connects that at the deeper level between the sort of the offspring of the Indo-European people, basically. So, like to say Indo-European people, I mean, there were a group of Indo-European people from somewhere in Central Asia, that kind of became things like the Belgica people and Corded people and so on in Europe, which kind of became the Europeans. But they mixed with sort of wherever they went, they mixed with the local population. But they are the thread that connects India, Iran, and then through the Caucasus into Europe. So it's this sort of quite a wide net, but it's not so wide that it encapsulates all cultures of the whole world, because that would be a very difficult project to kind of try.
And we also see this unique cultural element that I think that's kind of like maybe like your point, right? Which is like this solar path, right? Which is slightly different from, say, like a path of shamanic power, right? Which is somewhat like insular in that, like, you stay within your own tribe and you stay within your own worldview, and you're not expected to like kind of take this journey outside of the normal, right? Where like with the solar path, like you're going beyond what's expected in that normal tribal cycle of life.
Right. I mean, the sun was clearly extremely important to that group of people, and to the Indo-Europeans, which are the ancestors of all our all the various groups I'm looking at, partly because they kind of partly followed the sun west, actually. But yeah, exactly. I mean, it's essentially a sort of fairly rigorously masculine warrior culture. This path of action, where you allow action to become a transcendent activity rather than just an activity in itself. That you
That's
allow
an
that
internalization of fire worship, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Fire and the sun ultimately kind of brought inside, and the sort of the internal sacrifice. And then to the first book, of course, it talks a lot about the internal sacrifice, the Atma Yajna. And then the second book talks about the inner holy war, which manifests in Islam actually through the idea of the greater jihad, which is a very misunderstood word amongst the Westerners. But ultimately, jihad, holy war, is meant to be a war against yourself, like against your lower version of yourself. That's
the lower self that has these lower desires, right? Like there's a divide in the soul, right? This is an important notion that there's like a higher soul. We see this across this series of traditions. Like you see this in Hindu stuff. We see it in Greek, and then later on, even in like Western like occultism, that you have like a higher soul. It trends towards higher things, better things, right? And then we have a lower aspect of our soul that gets drawn down, and it needs to be sort of restrained.
Correct. Absolutely. I mean, like it's often seen as being a tripartite soul. There's like the very highest part, and then two parts which are kind of mortal. And that also with the Greeks, I mean, with all of them, but actually with my recent book talking about the Greeks, it's interesting because with Plato, there's definitely this idea of like the highest soul in the head, and then there's a soul in your chest and your heart, and then the lower aspect of your soul, which is in your sort of spleen and liver, which is, they relate to the elements like ether, fire, air, water, earth, but also with the lower part in the spleen and the liver being the sort of the emotional part, which is why when you fall asleep at night, you dream, and like the irrational soul takes over. And when
this is mirrored perfectly in Taoism, right? So you have these Hun spirits that live, they reside within the liver, and they're involved in the dreaming process. And then we have the correlation of different emotional spheres to the organs, right? So it's like a very interesting system. And it's also something that's reflected in modern science, right? That they've found neural networks in the organs, right? And we know that the consciousness isn't localized in the brain. And then one of the really interesting ones is that with different transplants of organs, that they've noted that there's psychological side effects that people have. They've noticed that certain traits will spring up in there.
Fascinating.
Yeah, because
it makes total sense to me.
You're just taking someone else's like heart, right? Which is an important neural network, and you're putting that in your body or their bone marrow, right? And you experience psychological changes.
So interesting.
There, and okay, could it be the trauma of having a serious illness and all these other things? Maybe, sure, right? But
I like to think of, because I mean, you do have. I mean, we've had the concept of the gut instinct, right?
Yes.
Oh, my gut tells me this, and it's like, well, of course, because the gut is also part of your, consciousness. It also thinks. I know.
Not only is it an organ, right, but it's also a consortia, right? So it's got millions and millions of bacteria in it that are contributing to your experience of your gut and contributing to your experience, right? Which also explains why you see psychological changes with antibiotics too, right? So there's some really interesting things there.
It's kind of interesting because, for years, the appendix was just like, it's this vestigial organ. Well, they found that the appendix keeps like your gut microbiome. It keeps basically bacteria in there for when there's a devastating kind of like impact on your gut and you lose lots of your gut flora.
It's like a kombucha starter for your gut.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing. It's just vestigial. It's not. It's actually a really important thing to have if you can have it. I know some people have had it out. So.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had it out, people.
Yeah. So it's pretty interesting that like Plato had this idea, and I think that there's a lot of this is something that I have a particular interest in, is the diamond, right? and how that connects, because I think that there's an important relationship between Plato's ideas and then Neoplatonism, and then seeing how that gets kind of transferred down the line, in the sense that these Plato's forms basically get personified into these diamonds, right? Like, and then you can have this personal relationship with it, and then it's going to give you this ability to sort of access this it gives you access to a higher level of insight about whatever it is that you do.
Yeah, ultimately a sort of intermediary, which is interesting because in the Iranian tradition, they have in their soul, they have the Ruvan, which is the lower, and then they have the Dana, which is the female. And it's actually almost a direct correlation for the daimon. It's like, it's kind of, once you actually start to see those parallels, that you realize, it's not just, and it's not that they necessarily arose independently, actually, that they obviously like come from somewhere deeper because they have shared sort of roots, and then they also cross-pollinated with each other. But there's obviously this deeper, greater truth there.
Yes,
that kind of that is manifested somewhat differently in its expression, but ultimately at the base of it is this same fundamental truth about being.
I think there are two things going on, right? Like, one, we have this Indo-European tradition, right, where there is this thread that they were in contact with each other, and they were sort of like sharing these certain practices. But then there's also this aspect that the human mind, spirit, soul, it works a certain way. We all have the same sort of like mechanisms. The dynamics might be different than what we're used to with physical objects, but there's a dynamic system to the mind, right? And the same things sort of come up. So I think you can actually even play this thing out down the line all the way to Carl Jung. So you see when you get to Jung, he flips the figure in the ground and says, okay, it turns out these things, these forms that we thought were outside of us, that we then personified, right? We thought all of this was outside of us, but really it's inside of us.
It's within us.
So what we want to do is we let the conscious mind, the I, step out of the way to let this part of the unconscious that is sort of like free to interact with the self in a deeper way come through. And that's sort of like the possession, right?
Yeah, right.
And but this is also the artistic state, right? And even for martial arts, this is how we're getting into flow states. I mean, the founder of Aikido was huge on this. He was always talking about getting possessed by the kami, by the spirits of Shinto, right? And one of the best interpretations I've ever heard of that is that, look, like the jin forces, the ki forces, the way that you move internally is done by the unconscious. Really good performance is done by the unconscious. So we get the conscious self out of the way, and we allow this other part of us to shine through. This is a process that I'm really interested in because it's key for performance. I think this is huge.
Well, I mean, the Japanese definitely talks about that a lot. This sort of the no mind, like what's it, Mu Shin or something like that.
The
no mind. Shin is heart and mind, really. But exactly. And it's kind of interesting because it's the same idea ultimately reflected in even things like the idea of the berserker, who basically just allows himself to be possessed by another part of himself in order to just go into battle basically naked with a weapon and just go, let something else take over. And it's like,
and it's fascinating the different tools that get used.
Valkyrie, like the in that sense,
like with the berserker, right? Like there's this notion that they were using psychedelics to get into that state, right? But there's so many approaches.
Possibility, certainly.
Like the approach that we see in the system, like that's presented in the book, is very different. It's like a step-by-step, like ethical, moral, developmental approach. This kind of goes back to what I'm saying. That's something that's indicative of that Indo-European tradition, right? Is that we don't reach that like state of oblivion by just eating a whole bunch of poisonous mushrooms and going crazy. We're going to ethically and morally discipline ourselves and train ourselves to the point where we can let go of ourselves in a like sort of like a conscientious, conscious, manual manner, rather than a shamanic.
Well, it's kind of interesting because that's ultimately my premise on the root of yoga comes out of that same thing. But I mean, like, even if you think about the sort of the like we're talking just before the podcast about Buddhism comes out the same Indo-European tradition, and the Buddha himself, Siddhartha Gautama, was a kshatriya. He was a member of the warrior caste. So I mean, there's obviously this warrior training and mindset, the idea that you basically have to train your mind to be able to go and die. You have to be able to go and be willing to die and know, and there's something about being that sort of that transcendent power when you're in battle, to know, okay, I can accept that this is my role. It's exactly what the Bhagavad Gita is about. This is your role as the warrior, but you have to be prepared for that role. You can't just be, not anybody can just go into battle and fight without this extreme preparation, the morality of the warrior. I mean, a friend of mine was talking recently to me, a while back actually, about the Sikhs and their concepts in battle. So Shastra Vidya is their is their fighting way. But their idea is that they want to kill you dharmically. They want to do so that is not, so there's no feeling and emotion there. That's his role. And he's going to come in and he's going to kill you with compassion. He wants to kill you as quick. He wants to take that head before you even know it. And in order to do that, to be that close enough to just take your head, he has to be able to look you in the eyes and he's gone, but then the same thing's happening from the other side. So it's this idea that the role of the warrior is a transcendent path, that there is a lot of preparation. People think, oh, it's a kind of the priestly caste that's spiritual and the warriors are just warriors, right? But that warrior role is an extreme. I mean, you have to deal with things that other members of society don't. And like, that tradition has come down to us in some form or another. And it's manifesting these days in the martial art tradition, because honestly, war itself has become a career path, and it's the soldier rather than the war. And that's not to diminish their role. They're amazing.
No.
Amazing, but there's no there's not the process. It's a different process.
It's been separated, right? Like it's very hard to go into the armed services and be able to play out the solar path. It's possible, and there's men who do it, and they're in huge roles in society, and we look up to them. And I listen to some of them myself, thinking of maybe David Goggins, right? But it's hard because you're working against an institution that doesn't necessarily condone what you're doing. And a lot of these guys have, after they've left the service and have gone on to do these solar path type things with their lives, they butt up against these institutions oftentimes. Right. The armed service comes back and says, hey, we don't really love what you're saying about us or this or that. We'd like for you to kind of change, what the message you're giving. Right. So it's hard. Right. So I think people are looking in other places for it. And martial arts is a natural for the average person. It's a natural place. And honestly, even if, and I believe that it is in some ways, even if some percentage of what we do in the martial arts is cosplay of it, I still think that has value, especially if you know that it is. Yeah, I think it's great. It's good to play those roles. Yes. It's good to dress up like a samurai and swing the sword around and do that thing if it makes you feel good, right? You need that. That's a way of getting that warrior energy into your.
Somebody once put it, not about martial arts, but about something else. They once said, is when if you LARP so hard, it becomes reality. And it's like that. There's something to that about the idea that you've cosplayed so hard that it manifests as absolute reality. It's no longer cosplay.
No, exactly. And I think I think there's a lot of value in it, regardless of hey, if it's real, because you can go train with Ed Calderon and learn from a guy who was dealing with counter cartel stuff, and it can get pretty real and scary and graphic, right? And then you can also go do Japanese kobudo, which was real in the past, but now is sort of like a reenactment, right? Yeah. And either way, you're going to get that psychological and developmental benefit, and I think that's. Yeah. For a lot of people, that's really important. That's a huge thing. And the last thing I want to touch on is I think that there's this relationship between the archetype of the warrior and the sage, right? And we see this probably one of the most popular examples of this is Musashi, right? Because he's the killer, he's the demon, and then he turns into the sage, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important progression when we're looking at these stories.
One of my favorite Japanese writers is a guy called, he wasn't a writer, he was a Buddhist priest, but he was a former samurai called Suzuki Shosan. And it's just like, it's pure cutting to it. Like his famous line is, become a vengeful spirit for the Buddha Dharma. But it's just like his whole thing is when he was asked, what can you give me some advice, and he just would scream at them, you will die, you will die, you will die.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like taking that, what they've had as a warrior, and channeling it into another place,
And I think that's really important, like you brought up with Buddha, right? So this is an extremely important progression and it reflects what goes on in the mind, is that the power of the warrior, right? The solar power restrains those lower instincts. And once it's finished restraining those instincts and sort of like conquering them, it gets redirected up towards higher goals, right? And that's where it becomes healthy. If the warrior energy gets trapped in those lower instincts and starts serving them, that's where it becomes like Titanic or demonic.
Right, exactly. I was going to say, the Titanic usurping kind of hyper masculine, hyper violence without any sort of transcendent heroic aspect. Because the hero
is the same thing in the mind and society at large, right? Like, what does the warrior do? The warrior, when there's war, the warrior fights and protects, and when the war is over, the warrior starts reaching towards that sage, right? Like the path of the warrior goes towards that place where you're culminating in this wisdom that you then pass down to the next generation.
Right, and exactly, and then the idea that the idea of the Indo-Europeans had the wolf cult, which is ultimately the warriors are wolf warriors. That the wolf is the totem, but the thing is that the wolf that only can be the lone wolf and can only be the wild wolf out there is no good. You need to be the wolf that can actually be a member of the pack, which means you're a member of society.
Yeah.
Reintegrate into society without always being outside of it, because the warrior is outside of polite society, what the Greeks would just call the polis, the city-state.
Yeah.
While they're performing that role, but they have to be able to return back into it. Otherwise, you just have a whole load of savage guys who are completely taken over by the violence to the point where they can't transcend through it.
This is where I think the Greek system is really does a really good job. And we also see some of this stuff show up even in like Christianity, is that what I want to talk about is like the myth as education, right? So like the whole first half of this quite hefty tome that you've just penned is myth, right? And you also have another 3 books that are actually kind of intersecting with this one in some ways about this solar path and this myth. But to me, like, people are always, I've always loved mythology. Like, since I was a little kid, like, I loved Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, Viking mythology. But
it's great.
But a lot of people always like, well, why? What's the obsession with mythology? And it took me a long time until I was much older and I studied young. And now I say, oh, wow, this is education for the warrior's path, right? These myths are telling you this is the journey of the hero, right? We see this exactly what you're talking about. You're met with crisis, right? You go out beyond society. You deal with things that others don't have to deal with, and then there's this notion, oh, the challenges are over, but they're not. The challenges really have just begun, because the real trouble is, how do you then come back into society?
Right.
And then in some cases have to go back out again, right? So you have this repeated passing between this like liminal boundary of being in society and out of society.
Right. Which is literally, in terms of the wolf, is the werewolf. It's the man wolf. What are you? You're part of nature. You're sort of the savage on the outside, but you're also part of society. And like, to become that werewolf ultimately is the real power.
So there's this one particular mythos I really like, and they have werewolves, and there's 2 types of werewolves. There's werewolves that are really wolves that can become men, and they're werewolves that are really men that can turn into wolves.
Right.
Right. So we have both, right? We have the warriors that really are possessed by the lower instinct and are almost like an animal, right? And they're only restrained by society and their officers, right? And then you have the ones that are men and can turn into wolves when needed.
When needed, which is the most powerful thing. Because I mean, it gets thrown around a lot, this idea that, you should be able to be violent, but you restrain it. But there's so much truth in that, because the idea that the fact, if you can have the power for violence when necessary, but have control over that, is so much more powerful than not having the power for violence and just being kind of like a gentle person.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And I think also this is why Hermes is so important in this tradition, right? Is that movement, the mercurial movement between two things.
His liminal. Exactly right.
And that's the
only
energy
God to go between worlds.
And that's like the energy that actually allows us to balance, right? Like I'm kind of thinking a little bit like tree of life stuff, but like when we balance like a Jupiter or like a Zeus energy that's merciful with like a Aries or a Mars energy that's very harsh, right? Like we need to learn how to balance those, like when is the appropriate time for those. And it's only through that mercurial energy that you're going. You have to be the Mercury to be able to do that.
Right.
So, exactly so important.
Yes, and that's ultimately probably why Hermes is the god of the Palaistra, of the wrestling school. He's the god of that. So he's reflected a lot as well in Indian and Iranian, so the Indo-Iranian god Vayu, who is the wind god, who is both. He's kind of like dubious because he's got both good and bad characteristics, because the wind can both like fructifying and like, ripen crops, but at the same time it can also destroy, so it's the idea that the wind can like both give life and take life, as in the Japanese concept of the sword that kills is the sword that gives life, like it's exactly that same idea, that there's that balance, and that there's the two facets to the same, and you have to kind of be able to tread that kind of path in between,
I'm so glad you brought this up, because that's actually something specifically I wanted to talk about, was winds, right? Because this is something that I'm very interested in, actually. Right? Like, so in Tibetan yoga, we have Salung, which is a practice of controlling and moving the winds in the body, right? And these winds, right, in the Indian tradition are called Vayus, right? Apana Vayu, upward, downward moving wind, Prana Vayu, upward moving wind, right? So you have these different movements of sensation. I like to refer to them as sensation in the body. And I think that this is important. It's important for martial arts, right? Like you can get power this way. This is a lot of what's going on in like Tai Chi, but also like even just like good boxing, or is learning how to move the body in a coordinated way so that the sensations are coordinated. So I think the concept of wind is huge just for movement, right? But then also,
the Greeks had the idea of pneuma, pneuma, pneumatic movement, like
there's actually a lot of reality to this, right? That
100%.
The breathing is going to give you power,
right? Through breath, you understand the body.
Yeah. No, it's so fascinating. But then also, right, in medicine, when we talk about Ayurvedic, Tibetan medicine, we talk about good and bad winds, right? So the winds, and we even see this in like medieval medicine, right? Like the plague was caused by miasmas.
Right. That's
so
right.
Wind is just like wind is energy, right? Wind is a movement of energy in a system. Right. And this is an old archaic way of understanding the world. But the benefit of it is that it's subjective. So it's from the perspective of our experience. So we see this movement of energy in our body, right? Or we can see the movement of energy out in the world. It doesn't really matter. But the idea is the same, that you have this movement. And this concept is really fascinating because it reflects my experience. So like one of the things that I saw in the book that I was like, oh, this is so interesting, is the idea of like victory being a particular type of positive wind. Because man, that is exactly what it feels like when you go to a competition and you just win. Like there's a particular feeling to that You know, and it's quite it's just, I was like, oh wow, this is quite a poignant description of how this really is.
Well,
And
it's kind of
sometimes
Nike is a care, is a kind of wind, right? A good because kier, it's actually pronounced in Greek kiris, but they are bad winds. But Nike is a good kier. It's kind of
it's a good bad wind.
A good bad wind, right? Exactly. Which is so. I mean, this, but on some level, it's like, wow, this is so complicated. But if you just stop letting it be complicated and you say, no, actually, that makes complete sense.
No, it's actually so fascinating, right? So yeah, this concept of wins is something that I'm like, this is I find really interesting. So I was really glad you brought that up, and I was excited to see it in the book. I was like, oh, this is super interesting that this is, you see this concept, and it becomes so clear that even all the way, because you often think of Buddhism as being a bit outside the scope of these other traditions, but even all the way into like Buddhist yoga, we see these same exact tropes. It's so fascinating. So I was excited to see that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's when I write, I kind of don't go in with a huge preconceived idea, but I have this feeling every time I write that I'm going to find where everything just kind of seems to just like cross over, the parallels happen, because of course they're going to, because they're all what in some ways you can describe as what sort of vertical transmission versus horizontal transmission. Like, so vertical transmission is often seen as what's divinely kind of taught and comes down from above to below, but it's essentially what's always true. Those things that are just always true, you don't need to be taught on a kind of human level. It's something that comes from like another level, like so like the idea of like something being always true is horizontal, it's vertical, like, rather than horizontal, because that which is horizontal has to be taught by one person to another, and it may or may not be true. It's that way, it's taught by a human being to another human being. Whereas like what is like vertically transmitted is basically, deep in your soul that thing is true.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Chogyam Trungpa about this, where he says like, the Buddha doesn't know how to change snow tires, right? The Buddha's knowledge,
that's great.
What you access through the solar path isn't practical knowledge about how to put chains on tires.
Right.
It's the universal truth of basic goodness that you know what, even if you don't know how, you can figure it out, and you can handle this.
Right.
It's the underlying thing that maybe will allow you to change the snow tires, but it isn't. You don't become omnipotent, right?
No. Yeah,
it's not omnipotence. It's because that would be having all the horizontal knowledge.
Yeah, right, correct. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that idea. I like the snow tires is going to be my new thing now. I'm gonna start using that.
It's a great one. I always it hit me really hard because I was kind of young when I saw it, and I remember going, oh wow, like yeah, like I've been thinking about this the wrong way. Like this is I'm not just gonna know everything. It's just about being actualized.
Right. I mean, it's like the ancient Greeks had this idea of anamnesis, like of unforgetting, of like kind of and that's what it is, that you already through all your previous existences, and they believed in this idea of the cycle of generation, that you've already, your soul or the spirit has already lived countless times. It knows things, but it has to drink from the fountain, the spring of forgetting, lethe, and instead of remembering. So when have gone through this process of going from higher and higher existences, you hopefully will remember more, and that when you drink in your sort of last incarnations, you'll drink from the well of memory rather than well of the spring of forgetting.
Yes.
So when you're reincarnated, you come back and it's easier for you to unforget what you already know.
Yeah. It's crazy because you see these exact dynamics in both Hinduism and Buddhism. And you also see very similar stuff in the notion of Pure Land Buddhism, where, the intermediary process is going to be, you're going to be given leverage in the next life to achieve, right? Like, so that's very interesting. It makes a lot of sense.
It does. I mean, and what's really interesting is that does go right across the spectrum. That it's not just isolated into one particular culture. You know, I mean, it obviously it's very strong in Indo-European culture, but you know, and then it goes into the sort of Chinese culture, who probably already had an idea of it before Buddhism touched them.
So it's interesting. This whole thing in Buddhism is very tricky because of the notion of no self. So in Hinduism, it's a lot simpler of a mechanic, or even in say like when you have a notion of a soul, it's very easy to do this, right? Like you just say, okay, the soul goes from lifetime
Right.
to lifetime, right? And the
Right.
physical body perishes, okay?
Yeah.
But in Buddhism, because there's this notion that there is that we can't pin down what the soul is, right? It's not that
Right.
there's no soul; it's just we can't pin it, right? So you
Right.
have this notion. Third turning of the wheel of Dharma is the main text on it is called Ratnagotra Vibharga, is also called Uttara Tantra, and it explains like what Buddha nature is and how Buddha nature works. And basically, it's this idea that fundamentally underlying the structure of the mind, there is this like clarity, right? And then in Tantra, this gets interpreted as like what they call like basic goodness, or like it's deified as Samantabhadra, or you'll see this blue Buddha, which represents this idea that primordially the mind has the ability to achieve Buddhahood. And
Yeah.
because the mind has the ability to achieve this, and that it's possible since, you know, whenever minds first arose, right, then the process of this is just like in what you mentioned, is a process of sort of an uncovering process,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And it's very interesting. My Buddhist teacher asked me to write about specifically about Ratnagotra Vibharga and martial arts, because I think that there's actually something very similar in that the martial arts are actually an endowment. We often think of martial arts as being on that vertical knowledge, but
Mm-hmm.
martial arts actually exist at a unique intersection of vertical and horizontal knowledge. You
Agreed.
can
Yeah.
intuit martial arts. It's
Yeah.
something that we understand intuitively and you can uncover. Can you get better by looking horizontally? Sure. Do I
Yeah.
recommend you study horizontally? I do.
Yeah.
But it's not all horizontal. There is a part
No.
of martial arts that can be that is in you, because
Yeah.
you are a physical, you are a human body. So you
Right.
understand the human body. So you
Well,
just
it's
need to transfer that and you can just do it.
well. I mean, I know that obviously, like, I don't know. I'm not highly versed in ecological systems, but like, I know that I would consider my path through martial arts being in all everywhere everything I've done with it ultimately has ultimately not been that these things have been taught to me and I have just taken those things on and that's that. It's that it's sort of revealed my way. That
Yes.
I have a latent way that I move, the way that I think, the way that I will do something. And that most of the things that have really become my way of doing it are things that I just discovered while moving, while practicing, while drilling, while rolling. That those things just this is the natural thing that I want to do. This is the path I want to take, and it's not something that can be taught necessarily. It's something that just comes out from within.
Yeah, exactly. And that also goes back to like the concept of winds, right? Because it just comes out, right? It like gets carried out on a special wind, right? The
I'm
sun is
trying to
giving
find
you a
that
hard
light
time
spot. I'm
right
going
now.
to yeah.
We're talking about winds, but the problem is the sun.
Yeah, the sun is my problem right now, but it's okay. I'm just gonna if I get I can see in this screen and then I can look in this one. There you go. I'm just gonna hold my microphone because then I can just speak like this.
But yeah, it goes back to wins, but also goes back to the idea of like why does it feel like it comes from somewhere else, right? Which is this diamond, right?
Right.
It's like it feels like it came. Oh, you had this insight, and it was like a gift, right? And
Right.
you see this in the Japanese martial arts too. They always are getting gifted scrolls from Tengu, right? Like the Tengu come
Right. Yeah.
down,
Yeah.
they're like, yeah, this is how you fight with a sword. What does that
Right.
represent? Why is this always the case? And it also speaks to like even like what we've been talking about today is like really important, because there's this spiritual element to martial arts. And
Yes.
if you really want the insight into the physical martial arts, you're going to get it when you hit that pinnacle of development, right? Like you have to reach that place where you can apprehend this with your mind, and then you're going to have that insight.
It's kind of interesting because, like, if you notice, so I love sumo wrestling. Like, I'm really into. I watch the Grand Sumo every 2 months, and it's something I've been kind of fascinated by.
I'm secretly hoping you'll do a 4th book on the sumo training systems.
One day. But they have this idea of, they always, if you see the interviews after the fights, they always, after the matches, they're always like, I in the very Japanese way, they're like, I will do my best, I will try harder. But they always also say, like, I just want to, do my brand of sumo. And what they mean by that actually is this concept of the tukon, however, I can't pronounce, I'm not sure exactly, but it's the fighting spirit. They literally believe that there is a fighting spirit within them.
Yes.
That expresses itself through them. That's why that's why, for example, the Yokozuna will always wear that large kind of belt with the streamers off it, because that is always worn by, that's always put around like trees with spirits in or gods in it. It's put around temples that have spirits and gods in it. And it's put
it's like honoring the power.
Has a spirit or a god in him.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's so fascinating. And that also reminds me, when we were talking about the idea of winds, right? There's another really important thing here, which is the wind horse or the flying horse, which in Mongolian and Tibetan stuff is talked about as the fighting spirit. And I think that this is something we're missing in the West, and it's so important for martial arts. And I'm glad this came up, because it's something I really wanted to talk about, which was like, okay, so why do most people fail at martial arts? Really? Because they quit.
Yeah, they quit.
They quit. That's all. That's the only reason.
They say a black belt is just a white belt that didn't quit, which is so true.
If you just don't quit, you will eventually get good.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So, I mean, I literally was thinking about this the other day, about how, I should do a video where I talk about how you don't have to be a fighter and a warrior in this thing. You can just don't quit, and you'll get better. You don't have to be like, I'm terrible at this, it's not for me. Just don't quit.
So what's the quality that helps you not quit? It's not having a robust physical body. It's not being able to kill everybody on the mat. It's having an indomitable fighting spirit. It's having this wind horse that just isn't going to be pushed down. So it's so fascinating to me. It's like, so what's the most important thing if you want to be a successful hobbyist in martial arts, or if you want to be a top level competitor? What's the most important thing? Cultivate your fighting spirit, and never let anything dampen it, and just keep your fighting spirit strong and don't quit.
Right. And it's because it's kind of interesting that in the West, like, okay, we've got like jiu-jitsu is Japanese, originally from Japan, like Muay Thai, it's originally from Thailand, and we've got the kind of Western boxing and wrestling and stuff. But even though we have these Asian elements of our martial arts have become melded into mixed martial arts, as to the West in general, like America and Europe, there's not really the spiritual and philosophical side of it. They've just kind of allowed that to completely go away. It's just like, it's just about the fighting, and that's not complete. There's something missing. It's not right. There needs to be a philosophical and ethical side to things. I mean, that's how you make that into a really powerful practice. That's how you make it something that isn't just like, I do this because I need to blow off some steam, or I like to fight people. It's like, you can do that and become a better human being. You can deal with life better, when you understand that.
And it's also, like, my gym's been closed, so I've been going around to different gyms, and we were going different places. I visited you. I was going different places, and someone was with me somewhere, and the idea was like, hey, it's really special when you have this ability to go around to different gyms and experience the different cultures and learn from them there, right? So there's something just so valuable about that. There's something really special with martial arts, that we have this ability to have that community like that. So that's something really powerful. And I think that it's crazy, because it seems like that's gone back to antiquity, and that's something that I've only really been able to appreciate through studying some of the stuff you put out.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, and the idea that the gym, no matter which gym it is, you'll walk into it, it's the great leveler, right? It doesn't matter who you are outside of that place. Like, it doesn't matter what level of society, you know, all the factors that we consider to be identifying factors of ourselves outside of the gym all fade into like nothing, because in the gym, the only thing that matters is that you're going to be there and putting the work in. That's what makes you one of the group. Is the fact that you're there doing it. That's it. It's like the Indians have this concept of all castes grind their shins against each other's necks in the Akara. Like, it doesn't matter what caste you are outside, because you're the wrestler in the Akara. That's that. That's
what the wrestler. Absolutely. And I think what they did better in the past was these systems were integrated, like you said, with the philosophical and spiritual systems of development, right? And what I'm noticing is that, like, okay, the martial arts, because it's this open community, it attracts people who are like wounded. There's a lot of really wounded people who get drawn into this stuff, and unfortunately, like, it's funny because somebody said to me, oh, this person was really weird. I can't remember where we were because we went to a bunch of different gyms, but somebody said to me, oh, that person was really weird. I said, like, people get into this stuff for a lot of different reasons. You never know, like, where they're at in their life and what's going on. They could be just coming off being a drug addict. They could have just been assaulted, like, you really don't know. So the thing that gets me and I get frustrated is that because these systems aren't integrated, those people often, they get chewed up like a meat grinder, They're thrown into this environment where you have people who are fine, who are learning the same stuff, and then they're sparring with them, and they're having this trauma response. The other person's, not, and they're at a huge disadvantage. And we need to, one thing I'm really working on is doing a better job of integrating this stuff. And I even though I'm Buddhist, I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is in stuff that's native to our culture, which goes back to this ancient Greek stuff in a lot of ways, because this is how we think.
Well, so it's interesting because a friend of mine, again, always says, my friend Ian, he's a HEMA guy, but he always says what America needs is the Palaistra. We need the Palaistra. We need places which are places for physical and moral training, that you learn both philosophy and physicality, that you basically learn to fight, learn to get strong, learn to use your body, but at the same time learn to use your mind, because the Greeks considered it necessary to learn music. The Greek kind of the men who'd go to the Palaistra would learn, and the boys would learn music, philosophy, and the fighting arts, wrestling, boxing, pancration, whichever was there.
No, this is what we need, especially it's interesting because, like I said, I'm Buddhist, and sometimes, people will be like, oh, well, they want to take my kids to church. And I'm like, please, like, go ahead, take them. And I'm like, because I want them to learn the Bible.
Right.
Like, I want them to learn the Bible. I want them to learn Greek mythology. You need an education in this, because ultimately, when you really learn it all, you'll realize that it's a monomyth, that there's different variations, but really, going all the way back, all the stories are all the same story. It's the story of the hero's journey. It's the story of the solar path, whenever you're looking at these epic tales. But we need that education in it, because there's so many reasons. But just one to start off with is to not get caught up in believing one is better than another, right? You're gonna, if you don't have the broad education in mythology, if I didn't study Latin, I didn't catch that exact copy of the Bible verse from Revelation in Virgil, right? So it says, like, he bound up the devil in chains and cast him into the outer darkness. And then in Virgil, it says that when Augustus Caesar came back to Rome, he bound up madness in chains and he cast madness into the outer darkness. And I caught that, and I was like, this is the same line from Revelation. And the teacher was like, yeah, they copied it from Virgil.
Yes. That's so cool.
And when I caught that, I remember, like, the whole thing being like, okay, wow, like, all right, this is a story that mankind's been telling ourselves for a long time.
Yes. Right.
Maybe
Right. But then, unfortunately, in modernity, we get told that these things are all just sort of unnecessary kind of superstitions, and that we need to let those things go in order to progress forward. Whereas,
meanwhile, the same concepts are Trojan horsed into the new religion, right? So you see in Christianity, because it's very interesting, you get this, you have the diamond, right? Your guardian like spirit, which has both positive and negative qualities.
Yes.
Right? It's a mixed bag, just like we are. But then you get this sort of like very interesting dualistic cut introduced with Christianity, and they say now you have a guardian angel,
right,
and a personal demon,
right.
So you have a light and a dark force on
the older angel and little
and
demon.
what is that but a bifurcated diamond?
Yeah, right. Correct. That's correct.
So
and it's because of the dualistic nature of of that religion. It had the dualism, but like that ultimately, the Greeks didn't have that same dualism. They had, they had facets of the same, of sort of, single ideas. It's kind of interesting.
So it's so fascinating that like we there's this tendency to look back and sort of like belittle the culture of the past, and meanwhile have the same thing functioning in our modern worldview, and never pick up on the fact, oh hey, you know what, we actually this concept actually came from somewhere a little bit earlier down the line, right? And hey, it's useful, right? Who says that you can't get a victorious win from your guardian angel, right? Like and this is exactly how people experience these things. And heck, like, athletes are notorious for being superstitious.
Oh, 100%.
Right, because we don't know exactly what gets these wins going. So
you
think maybe if I wear the same underwear,
do it religiously, even though it's irrational. So I'm going to just have to do this ritual before every time. I have to make sure. It's like there was a famous English football player back in the day, and the joke was always that every time something happened that he felt that helped him win, he added it to his routine, and he ended up having to do about 50 different individual things before every single game. Otherwise, he would feel he'd lost, he couldn't win.
So I did a really great interview, hasn't come out yet, with a translator of ninjutsu texts. Guy's name's Eric Shahan, who's a really interesting fellow, lives in Japan. And we were talking about like the kuji, like the hand signs. And he was saying that, the kuji is something people did, and it sort of was like magic, and it sort of had these different notions to it. But there was this aspect to it that was sort of like, before you go do a big thing, you want to feel right. So like it was the equivalent in some ways of like, certain men will like shave their beard, or like, like a teenager doing a bottle flip and like having the bottle land right. Like if you do the kuji and you feel right, then you're like good to go, right? So these these little psychological rituals, and we see this like in sumo too, right? Right before they go, they're slapping the belt, and they're kind of like positioning themselves to make sure that they're in the right spot, and they're like, okay, now I feel it. I've got that, at least within. I've got this victorious wind going.
Right. And in sumo, you really see the sort of like, okay, they all do similar things, but they see certain, like ways they do that thing. Like you'll see, Uro always do. He sort of do this weird hand blowing, kind of like getting his mind ready, and like, or there was what was he called? There was a guy who used to do a huge salt throw. He used to fill his hand with enormous amount of salt and throw it really high in the air. The crowd all like loved it because it was like really exciting. But yeah, everyone's got their little thing that they would do,
But it's interesting too, because you see this like like you're doing like martial art almost at that level. Your movement isn't for fighting. Your movement is mental preparation for fighting. Right? Like the Y crew is another good example of this, right? And this is also an important part of martial art, and an aspect of solo movement that I think people are overlooking now. They're saying, oh, solo movement's completely useless. it can be very valuable, right? Because you can use it as sort of like it's this weird crossover between like almost like dance and like it has like an invocation element. So like there almost is like a theater element, right? A ritual magic element, right? And we're doing this in order to prepare our minds and put ourselves into a state to perform. And you see athletes doing stuff like this intuitively, but again, we can amplify what we do on the vertical like axis of what we can just figure out on our own by studying what's done horizontally.
Correct. It's actually kind of interesting because, like, you know, obviously these days people like to kind of poo-poo katas and so on, especially from a combat sports perspective, but there's something so powerful about a kata.
I think this is the real the best value of one of the best values of the kata is this, like a psychological like power up ritual between you and yourself in the shape of the moves you're going to use when you're fighting.
And it also encodes things that are sometimes missing, like our mutual friend Tony Huyen. He was talking to me the other day. Like a lot of the karate katas actually encode throws. Like you think they're punches, but they're actually push and pull. Like it's from when there was a lot more grappling in it, or you know, like it encodes things that have now kind of fallen out of that martial art, but are encoded into the kata, which kind of is essentially the sort of mythology, the mythology movement. You know, it's like the way that mythology encapsulates like that kind of weight of culture and that what is always true. The kata can also kind of encapsulate that.
No, kata is the oral tradition of martial art, just the way that the Aeneid is the oral tradition of the Romans, right? So what you're saying is absolutely true. And I actually also just released a really great podcast about this with Russ Smith, he's a phenomenal martial artist and educator. And he does a lot of work around unpacking kata and the right way to do that, because it's something that I learned from my Tai Chi teacher that transformed my understanding of martial arts, was to say, okay, we don't need these long applications. It's just, you're just doing this, and that can be a deflection, that can be a chop, that can be a joint lock, that can be a throw, right? So these same movements, and if I take this movement here and instead of using my hand, I use my elbow, right? Now it's an elbow strike and it's a different throw or a different joint lock, right? So these little movements in the katas can be extrapolated out almost infinitely into applications.
That's so interesting. Right. It is. It's like I like that idea. It's the oral tradition. It's like it's the seed, right? It's that it keeps everything that you need, that seed of the martial art, that it could, if you let it sprout, it will blossom into like the entire martial art.
Yeah, and then you see that in like, you'll see that in sparring, right? So like that's the like you water the seed first by like, you have to practice the form until the plant is strong enough, and then at a certain point it breaks through to the surface, and then you start sparring, and it grows more and more and more and blossoms into a full art.
Yeah, agreed.
It's so interesting. It's fascinating.
It is. I mean, it's because, I mean, we're told, and obviously I believe very strongly that, you know, that live sparring, live rolls, live sparring is extremely important to make sure that you're not just kind of like making stuff up.
Castles in the sky, right?
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, there's so much value in the pure forms, in just moving, you know, without having to go live, and like, you know, there's value in both. You know,
I think it's so important
because of the other.
Yeah, I think people need to know what they're looking for and what they want in a particular arc of training, or they need to trust their coach. But one or the other, right? So you either know like, hey, like I'm preparing for big competition, I need a lot of live training, or I'm run down and I'm going through a lot of mental emotional stuff, I need to do more psychosomatic work, it's time to slow down and do more forms, you know, or do more like WarYoga type, you know, squats and push-ups and work that internal sacrifice and burn those things out of the system, right?
And it's kind of interesting because the Greeks had a similar. I mean, they kind of took it to a super extreme in some ways in the tetras and the tetrades, the fours, but like so that they had this 4-day system where you train hard. It'd be like 100%, 75%, 50%, 25%. Then the fourth day again, then the next day went through the same cycle of 4 days, 4 days, 4 days. But that became so rigid in the end that it actually became kind of, in some regards, detrimental to some of their athletes. But that actually, I think, comes from an earlier thing, which is in Hippocrates. And Hippocrates talks about seasonal training and the idea that, that ultimately you're training differently in the winter, in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall, because like you're eating differently, you're training differently, because you've got different light conditions, different weather conditions, different internal body conditions based on that. That we have these ideas, we have to be very rigorous, like we always do this no matter what, and that's not the way it should be. There needs to be some understanding that there are cycles that you need to be able to.
I think that original understanding is incredibly insightful. I see similar stuff sometimes in Taoism, learning how to, and also in Tibetan Buddhism, that the training is modulated according to the season, even down to in Taoism, wearing specific colors during specific seasons, that it helps balance the organs and stuff. So they have a really mapped out science of that. But that's actually something that's one of my goals for the next year, is to start incorporating that understanding. And I think that it's a little bit.
That's so funny, because that's also in me. Like,
that's funny.
Understanding something really, like, I've got to go into this like properly,
because it's valuable. Because I think that's a weird insight that comes with a little bit of age. Because I'm realizing now, like after existing for 31 years, I'm like.
Wait till you've existed 45, mate.
I'm like, every winter things are like this, and every summer things are like this. Maybe I should kind of like roll with that instead of trying to fight it every year, And I think it's less nowadays because we have climate controlled indoor conditions, right? So like it's not as big of a deal, but it's still it affects your mind.
The sunlight actually tells your body a lot. Your circadian rhythm is completely different at each time of the year. The reality is that we should be sleeping a lot more in the winter and resting more in the winter. We should be more active in the summer, where we've got so many more hours of light, and that ultimately the light does actually charge our energy systems. Like, if you wake up and you go and look at the sunrise, you actually wake up for real.
Yeah.
Instead of artificially waking yourself up.
No, the light hits your eye, and it affects your body's perception of time.
Right. Correct. Absolutely right. And so why wouldn't training reflect that? Because that, of course it should. I mean, that makes total sense. And like, your diet's different in the winter than it is in the summer. In the summer you want, and that's so funny, because like in traditional Chinese medicine, in Ayurveda, they understand this. When it's hot, you want cooling things. When it's cold, you want heating things. It's just so funny that in the West, because of our kind of advances, that we feel like we're sort of these great masters of the world and what we've managed to achieve.
Yeah.
And that's also coming into India and the East as well, because, they've also got these same technological advances. But we've lost sight of the fact that we do exist within the world, which has a cycle, that we have to somehow still operate within those cycles. But we're just so sort of like, we feel we're so clever with our own brilliance that we're like, oh, we don't need any of that because we're just brilliant and clever.
Well, I always go back to like thinking about like Adler and like the like compensation, right? That like you have man alone in the jungle, naked, toolless, right? And then you look at what we've done to the world, right? Like it's in many ways it is for our comfort, but it also is it is a huge act of compensation. So we've reached a point where our we've compensated so much for to alter nature, to make it more amenable to us, that we, to a man with a hammer, right, everything looks like a nail. So that's our way of solving the problem, is to try to alter nature. So we don't think, oh, let me go in tune with the seasons. We think, no, I'm going to crush nature. I'm going to make climate controlled, My Tai Chi teacher used to joke about this tongue in cheek. Like, he would get allergies and he'd say, why can't we just burn all the trees down? And speaking of what you're saying too about the solar cycle, I don't know how true it is, but I've heard this a few times that much how like women operate hormonally on this lunar cycle
Yes,
that goes monthly, that men actually
they do.
operate very much on a solar cycle, that our
100%.
emotions and hormones have like sort of a big crescendo in the summer and then
Yes,
sort of start to tank down throughout the winter, right?
that's
And
completely correct. And the older I get, the more I physically feel that. Like, strangely, this winter I really noticed that, like, I feel like the summer I feel like super powerful. Like, I feel like maybe it's my, hormonal levels are higher. I feel like I can really like smash through stuff. And this winter I felt kind of like, lower energy, lower everything.
yeah,
But because they've talked for a long time about daily cycles, that men's hormones are on a daily cycle, that actually our
yes,
testosterone peaks when the sun peaks
yes,
ultimately, and is at the lowest when the sun is the lowest. It's gone,
yeah,
the nighttime. So we're on these sort of daily cycles like this. And yes, the female cycle is lunar, but the male cycle really is absolutely tied to
solar,
the sun,
yeah.
seasonally and daily.
So it's almost like what we're saying is that the movement of the winds outside of your body affects the movement of the winds inside your body.
Right, correct.
That's
Correct.
very cool.
I mean, it's the understanding that you are part of nature, that you're part of the cosmos, that we're not aloof from it. I mean, like, we have this amazing ability as human beings to kind of think critically, to think in the abstract, which is really our power, but it's also a detriment to us in other ways, because we
Yes.
kind of feel ourselves outside of nature, whereas we're not. We are still within it. Just because we're able to manipulate certain elements of it, or we're able to kind of like conceive of higher ideals, doesn't mean that we're outside of nature. We're still
Yeah.
by it.
No, our greatest superpower is at the same time our greatest hindrance is our self-awareness.
You're right.
Our ability to be aware of ourselves is
Right.
it allows us to do all the amazing things that we do, and at the same time it's our greatest weakness. It's why people kill themselves.
Right.
It's like it's such a powerful thing that we have, and at the same time it can be absolutely crippling in some ways.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct. Because
so,
it can become an enormous obstacle, which, I mean, again, though, if you take it to another level and you're good enough, you can overcome that obstacle and make it the thing which actually allows you to get to the next level.
but I think it's really hard. They did this really terrible experiment with rats where they were drowning them, and they would drown the rats, and the rats would last about 15 minutes. And then they would drown the rats, and right before the rat was going to die, they'd pull it out and give him a rest, give him a snack, and then they'd throw him back in. It's terrible. I told you it was terrible.
It's really terrible.
The second time they threw him back in because he thought he was going to be saved, they would swim for 45 minutes instead of 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is that the scaffolding that comes from the mythology,
yeah,
influences your behavior because it lets you know there's something beyond that dark night. If you don't know about the dark night of the soul, and you don't know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel because you never studied any of this mythology,
right,
you're not going to make it through. Because if you don't know there's something on the other side from somebody you trust and something you believe in, it's too much.
It is. That's correct.
So I think that this education, like when we say like this is what America needs, is this education in basically mythology. And I don't say that to make it less than what it is, because I lump Christian, Islam, Buddhism, I lump all of it in with mythology, and I mean it as a compliment.
Yeah.
This is required reading for being a human.
Right. It's kind of interesting. I mean, even I was thinking about the whole thing with the rats. Horrible thing with the rats.
Why would they do
that? But also in the West, even like, for example, with lifting and training, we think in terms of reps and sets. I do this many of this and this many sets, and it's all fixed. But actually, traditional training doesn't think in reps and sets. And actually, that is part of the reason that they can just do enormously long, crazy sets, because they're, what we'd call a set, because they can just they don't think in reps. They just do it. They do it. And it becomes like, I'm actually just moving in a pattern. I'm moving in a rhythm. Rhythm becomes the form. Rhythm becomes the way of operating.
Well, it almost becomes about like the wind that animates the movement, right? Like when I'm doing like lots of squats or the push-ups, right? Like the wind and other things beyond the muscle become the primary driver. It becomes more mental, like the concentration, and also the movement of the wind to cycle the blood through so that you can keep going, right? Like that's more.
I mean, the ancient Greeks certainly, like the rest of some of the things I've learned from this book, they worked in these ideas of rhythm, just the same as the Persians did, the same as the Indians did and do. You know, like it's just that. So you can see that we had these concepts in the West. We at some point in our history, yet in what's happened is we've kind of like just let them fall by the wayside and go into kind of more scientific, quantifiable.
Well, I want to give an apologetic for the West.
Yeah.
My apologetic is this, okay?
Yeah, go.
We want to quantify things.
Yes.
And our tools for quantifying things are limited.
Yeah.
And they were more limited in the past and less limited now, but still very limited, right? So we've tended to look at things that are easy to quantify. And that's led us to look in the wrong places because nature didn't evolve for us to quantify it. So by trying to organize things as, what's easy? Look at a barbell. A barbell is exactly what I'm talking about. A barbell is easy to quantify.
Yes.
Right? A stone is hard to quantify. Yes. Right? So what's more functional strength? Lifting a stone, right? Yeah. But people prefer the barbell because it's easier to quantify, and we live in a world that we like things to be quantifiable, right?
Right.
So it's the same issue with exercise. Well, what's one of the best ways to train somebody for athletics? Dance. Why don't more athletes do it? Because it's not easily quantifiable.
Right.
What kind of dance do you do? How much of it do you do? When do you do it? Should you, those are hard questions.
But it's amazing. That's because, like, someone like Vasyl Lomachenko, the boxer, his father put him into ballet when he was too young to box. Like, as a preparation, he was like, he's going to go do ballet. Why are you doing ballet? So he can become a boxer. It was just, wow. Like,
it freaks people out because it's not quantifiable. It's like, well, when during the ballet is he going to be good at boxing?
Right.
How much ballet do you have to do?
Right. I mean, he's obviously like a phenomenon, but like his formative training really was important. His father sent him to ballet, and then he sent him to wrestling.
Yeah.
So that he could understand how to clinch, how to move in another. So like there's something again that we forget is like that. Boxing, we separate striking and obviously we've got MMA, but traditionally we've separated striking and grappling as these two different arts, and then MMA is a sort of synthesis that's started to develop. But like when I was writing this book, Palaistra, I realized like the boxers would often train with the wrestlers, and the wrestlers often train with the boxers, even though they weren't going to do pankration, even though they weren't going to do the other ones up. They just wanted to get the knowledge they get from that for their art.
I always try to get my students to think that way, and it's always a battle, like it's so true. Like one of the best examples of this was I was listening to Ed Calderon talk about something, and he was talking about how he learned how to set up a sterile surgical space in a hotel room. And everybody, all the medical people, he was teaching this to like some group of like, they were like military, but also medical, or police and also medical. Yeah. And they're all going, how do you know all this? And he goes, oh, well, I had this friend who was a tattoo artist that did really famous people in hotel rooms, and he knew how to make a hotel room sterile so he could do these tattoos for people and not make sure they wouldn't get infections. And I learned this from him. He taught me how to do all of this, and the people are mind blown. But this is where the Western way of thinking fails: is that we don't understand what we can learn from people. There's so much that can be learned from things outside of your domain. I have learned so much about jiu-jitsu by doing sumo. I've learned. I mean, you got to go with me, so you see how. Like, I have very different stand-up game.
I really enjoyed going with you, actually, because I kind of got to feel how you move. I'd like to actually like a lot more time.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, I actually even tried a sumo move on you. I tried the katasa kash.
Yeah.
But you know, I could feel that you move differently, and that comes from the fact that you have studied widely and learned more about yourself through that. I mean, the idea of like learning that, you know, from other things, but I really have come to the realization over the years that everybody is your teacher, or has the potential to be a teacher. Like everybody you encounter in life has the ability to teach you something.
Absolutely.
You know, and then you have to actually listen. You know, you just have to be aware. Okay, and also conversely, teaching, you end up learning from your students, from what you teach.
Yeah, that's a really weird one. I have a particular student. Every time I do a lesson with him, I swear I learn more than he does. But
Same.
it's like I'm like, this is a good deal.
Yeah. No, right. I have a student the same, and she asks so many great questions and sees things a certain way. I'm like, oh man, I haven't thought about that. That's, you know, you'll be like, oh man, I do move this thing this way to get this. Like, oh, and
That's
so I
leave
those thinking, wow, yeah, I've learned way more than maybe even than she has, you know. Yeah.
So last thing before we wrap up here, because we're running out of time, but
sure.
I want to just ask, like, you know, in terms of this book and this particular what was covered in it, like, what do you think, like, what stands out to you as contributions that this material makes that we should look at? You know, like what's in there that you're like, man, like, you know, I want people to see this. This is really what drove me to put this out here. Almost kind of, you know, in some ways circling back to what we started on.
Yeah, right. So a few things really. So one of the big things is that I actually want people to look at it and think, and see, especially some of the practical stuff, and realize that there's nothing new. You know, that we haven't like become so clever that we've invented a whole bunch of new stuff throughout martial arts. That you know, and because lots of people be like, oh well, that Asian martial arts did this and whatever, but like to actually see that there's a Western tradition as well. There's a Western tradition of martial arts that is ancient, like deeply ancient.
Yes.
I mean, you know, the first Olympics in history in the 8th century BC, you know, so we're talking like 700 years, you know, but 2,700 years ago, and that's not even the beginning. That's just when we can actually quantifiably record it, you know, like this
so old that people were heel hooking centaurs.
Yeah, we were heel hooking centaurs. But yeah, there's nothing new. We're not all clever and blah blah blah. You know that this wasn't invented until this guy did it and he named it after himself. Like
like we're still hitting heavy bags and punching in the air and throwing things and
And the funny thing is like, especially I've been doing videos about what I've been learning while doing the book, and people are like, oh, that's just like what we do now. I'm like, yeah, like yes, right. But on top of that, to also, like what I was saying, the idea that there has to be another dimension, like rather than just sitting there and saying, you know, oh well, you know, we hit the bag and this and we do this and we do that and it's just purely physical. I want people to understand as well that there is something that we're missing in the West, is that sort of spiritual, moral, philosophical, mythological level. And that's so valuable. And if we can actually add that dimension into what we're doing, suddenly a lot of things start to make more sense on a kind of like broader scale of our life, you know, that we can then take what we learn in the gym and not just compartmentalize it to being that's the gym. That's what I do actually.
Yeah. And I think about those people who come to this stuff not to be top level competitors or because they've been successful in other things, but the people who come to these things because they're like wounded and need healing and support and stuff. And that this could be an even greater medicine for them if it was, you know, integrated that way.
100%. I mean, 90%, more than 90%, 99% of people who go into a martial arts gym are not going to become a fighter or whatever. And the thing is, it's like, that's fine. That's great. You know, that's absolutely brilliant. Like, very few people are going to be high level fighters or grapplers or whatever you want to say.
We don't need a million professional fighters. But it would be great if more people did martial arts.
Not only don't we need it, we do not need that. We don't want it. It's not desirable. Like what we actually want is, is in a gym, you want a good healthy mix. It's like we say, if you walk into like a jiu-jitsu gym and all you see are black belts and brown belts, that's probably not a particularly approachable gym. There's no white belt. Whereas if you go into a gym and you see a healthy amount of white belts and a good mix of the middle belts and the upper belts, like, okay, this is a gym which is going to be easy to go into and train and learn, and it's going to be friendly and open to people. Like, it's usually a warning sign actually when you go somewhere and all it is just killers.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all killers, but like a beginner has no chance here.
Yeah,
like, they're going to get only a certain kind of person will thrive in that environment.
And they also all probably were killers and decided to get together in that particular place.
Yeah,
more likely than they became killers there.
Yeah, right. And that's fine. It's fine for those places to exist. If you are a professional fighter, you want to be surrounded by other killers. But like for most people, that's not a good environment for them to be in, especially not as a beginner.
Yeah, and for most people, I think even for fighters, they can afford to take 10% or 20% of the time they're spending training and work on these other aspects that we're talking about and have it be integrated. I think it would benefit everybody.
Look how many, and I know personally, like a lot of like professional fighters who retired and then had enormous psychological problems.
Yeah. Because a lot of them retire because they have enormous personal and psychological problems.
That's true. But and also like that when they retire, they've got nothing because they feel like their entire being was into this fighting, their entire sense of self.
Yeah, they became the role, right? They are the wolf. And they can't turn back into the man to go back into the society.
Right, they can't come back into society, and it's like so. In the book, I talk in the Lycaea, which is one of the earliest athletic festivals that the others are modelled on. Essentially, it comes from a kind of rite of passage festival where the young men would become wolves, go off, and come back like years later and reintegrate to society and compete in the games. Which happened, and it's a really interesting story. But the thing is like if while they were a wolf, they tasted human flesh, they would always remain a wolf. They would never become a member of society. Is the myth, and it's that same thing that they lost their humanity while being outside of society. But whereas if you can be the wolf but retain your humanity, you can then become the man again.
Yes,
and with that kind of the fighter that just becomes the fighter so much so that it's kind of covering up psychological issues they may have or emotional issues they may have, that when that's gone, which inevitably will be because we're all going to get old and sick and die, like that, what is there left for you? And that is almost a space that's not being filled by anything in modern Western combat sports, that there needs to be something else that goes with it in order that it isn't just the Titanic just fight.
So you need to make that transition from the warrior archetype to the sage, right? Like it's like you need to graduate from Ares to Athena, right? It's that that arc.
Yeah, exactly right. Man. And that's kind of what's missing. And so I hope to some degree the book does address some of that. Like it continues the same themes as the other books, and it also, like, I hope it brings people to the understanding that the West isn't separate. It's just become somewhat disconnected from Eastern traditions. That the Eastern traditions and the Western traditions are
they started together, right? Like we have this Indo-European, and then
correct.
There's sort of like this branching out, and then you get things like Buddhism, which look different because of the no self, no soul type thing. But it's sort of actually more of a surface difference when you really get into the nitty gritty.
It absolutely is. And so, I hope that's what happens. And
I think as a trilogy, that the books address this extremely well. I think as a trilogy,
it's not even just going to be a trilogy.
Ooh.
There it is. I'm going to be beginning my research this year for number 4. I can see several books in my mind.
Do you have an idea of what it's going to be?
Oh, I know exactly what it's going to be.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah. It's progressing. It's continuing its journey. So in India, Persia, Greece. So it's going further.
Huh.
Going further west. I'm going to be. I'll tell. I basically I'm going to go into the Roman material,
Got it.
the kind of Italiot.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And I'm actually really interested to see what that yields.
Very cool.
Without too much expectation, but I'm actually going to be looking specifically at the game of Harpastum, which is the Calcio. Essentially it's like a game of mob football, except you're allowed to strike. You're allowed to kick, punch, and grapple.
Fascinating.
Used by the Romans. It came originally from the Greeks into Rome, and Plato believed that this ball sport, this ball game, was the most beneficial for a citizen because you had to work as a team. So it's basically team fighting over a ball, which is kind of fun.
That's fascinating. Yeah, no, I'm very excited.
So that's going to be the kind of the physical lens, and then I'm going to be looking obviously into the sort of philosophical, logical from the Latin, Roman, Etruscan, etc. tradition. That's where I'm looking. But like I said, I haven't even started yet, so that's a prequel taste.
Well, that's very cool. I'm excited. Well, you heard it first here.
You heard it first here. I mean, it's not going to be next year. It won't come out next year. It'll come out like in 2027. End of 2027, it'll be when that comes out. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been great. I really recommend everybody go on Amazon, pick up a copy. A lot of great stuff in here. I've been really enjoying it. Hopefully I get some time to look at it today, and my infant daughter will let me read it. She was actually trying to, I don't know if you saw, but she also likes your book.
That was so cute. Yeah, I saw it. So I had to share that too because that was sweet. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing this, Tom. It's been a blast.
Thanks,
and, I'm sure we'll come back for another.
Oh man, I'm always down. I'm always
very cool.
I like to talk, and it's great talking to you too because you get things on a level which many struggle to understand immediately. So
excellent stuff. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
I think